Welcome back to part 2 of the WARNO Bootcamp series that I'm holding for all of you guys to hopefully learn a thing or two about this game, and even for the more advanced or the more experienced players that some of you might be, you might pick up something new. Now, speaking of something new, a lot of new patrons have joined this month. You guys are supplying me with coffee, and in return you're getting content. I really do appreciate it. Jump over to Patreon, see what you can do. Just, just have a look over there. You don't even need to be a patron. Just have a skippity bit all over that website and just have a look. Now, in this one, as promised, I'm going to build a US 3rd Armored Battle Group. And it doesn't really matter which battle group I go for, but since we kind of already touched upon this in the last episode, or in episode 1 of our bootcamp series, we're just gonna roll with this and keep it nice and, keep it nice and continuous, let's say. So to build a battle group, we go into the armory. Now here, basically all the units are being shown for both NATO and Warsaw. It's kind of just literally every unit you can play with. Now, if you want to build one yourself, you just go and click on battle group, click create, and then it's a little bit more organized. So for each country, you have all the different types of battle groups you can go for. So for America, we have the 3rd Armored, the 8th Infantry, which is a mechanized one, and then the 82nd Airborne. Now, click on the 3rd Armored, and let's click Select. So in the Logistics tab, you have things like supplies. So we have an M113 supply, we have an M35 supply truck, and then we have the Hammett supply truck as well. And all three of them are supply trucks, but they differ in a few ways. For example, this guy is slightly armored. The armor value of vehicles is shown here. So it has 2 frontal armor, 2 on the side, 1 on the rear, and 1 on the top. These aren't amazing by no means whatsoever, but it will help with survivability. Let's say you're moving into an area with a lot of artillery. It'll help a little bit to survive against that. The downside of this unit is that it only has 500 supplies, which is kind of in the mid-range, so it is still not too bad. When we look at the M35 supply truck, we get the same amount of supplies, but this unit is much faster because it's a wheeled unit, and we can compare that by pressing on the first unit, clicking the pin, and then hovering over the second one. Now, if we look at the stats at the bottom, we can see that the supply truck, so that's the left unit, the M35 supply, has a speed of 54 kilometers per hour and 100 kilometers per hour. The left speed is off-road speed, while the right speed is the road speed, so when it's on an actual road. And as you can see, the M113A2 supply truck is much slower, but it is slightly more armored. Now you get same amount, so it doesn't really matter. You just need to kind of make up your mind if you want something that is armored versus something that is fast. Then you have the beast of a supply truck here with 2,500 supply units, let's say, and that is actually quite a bit, trust me on this. And as you can see, it is not armored, it's even less than 1 on pretty much anything, but again, it is nice and fast and it has a ton of supplies. So what I like to do in this scenario is I would probably go for something like the M113A2 supplies for really like close front line supplying. I'll get the Hammett supply truck mainly for artillery, and then I'll also get the UH-60A supply helicopters. Now we need commands, and command units, everything basically with this star on it, can be used to capture zones on the map. In Destruction, if you capture a zone, you increase your overall income, and that income can be used to purchase units. In Conquest, if you capture a zone, you increase your conquest point income, and if you reach a certain point in your conquest points, you win the game. So all of these can do just that. So it doesn't really matter which one you go for, but there are some important things to take into consideration. For example, if you go for this guy, you get 3 of them per card, but obviously it is not armored. Whereas if you go for the Bradley, it has much better armor, and it actually has a lot of weapons as well, such as an autocannon and an ATGM and an M240 light machine gun. We will go through all the stats here when we go into the infantry, artillery, and tank. But the main takeaway here is that some commands are armored and will offer much better protection, while other ones aren't armored, but you get more of them. Now, if we look into the infantry tab here, we got a lot of choices. Now, before you ask, why didn't you get a command? I'm going to get to that later, because there's a cool trick you can do to save you some points, save you some activation points. Now, in the infantry tab, the way I like to build my divisions or battle groups is by first starting with the best unit that I can find and going with it. For example, The mechanized rifles are quite expensive and usually cost resembles quality, but not always. In this case, the mechanized rifles and basically all the infantry that I have are regular units except for the engineers. The engineers are shock units. And what this does is shock units can inflict more suppression when fighting in CQC. So if you're in woods or urban terrain, not now Chromator, if you're in woods or urban terrain, the engineers will be able to deal much more suppression to the enemy, and this might give them the upper hand in a fight like that. You also have units that are only airborne, so they can only come in Blackhawks, for example, so that's usually something I go for as well. So in this case, I do appreciate having some infantry and helicopters, mainly as like a quick reaction force, not so much as my opener, but if I need to quickly reinforce a position that is kind of slipping or just needs some extra bodies, this is kind of like a good unit to do that with. Now, when we click on any of these units, we have a lot of statistics on the right side. Infantry doesn't have armor. This is only for armored vehicles, but all the weapons here are listed. And the statistics that are shown here are quite nice and self-explanatory. So we have the weapon damage, the HE damage that it does, and the suppression values that it does. Obviously, an assault rifle has less suppression than a light machine gun. In this case, the LMGs do much more suppression, but the damage is a little bit less. The range we have over here, so target ranges on ground targets is 850 meters, and it can fire at 0.5 kilometers away helicopters. And this is shown for both the assault rifle and the LMG. Now when we look at the accuracy here, we notice that it's 31% and 14%. Now static means that when this unit is standing still, this is the accuracy. When it's moving, it can still fire, but it has a reduced accuracy, which makes sense. Now shooting attributes is all about the weapon and the training of these units. So we have the rate of fire, this is mainly the gun. Chromator! We have the rate of fire of the weapon. We have the aiming time, which is 1.5 seconds. So when these guys spot someone and they are within range, it'll take them 1.5 seconds before they can open up. And then we have the reload time, so after every burst, they will have to reload again. And the supply cost is shown here as well. So if this unit runs out of ammunition for all of these assault rifles, it'll take 160 supplies to fill it back up. Now the same kind of stats are shown for the light machine gun here, but the interesting thing here is that this is only a stationary weapon, so they need to actually stand still in order to fire it, and this is also shown here by not having a motion accuracy here. When we look at anti-tank weapons, we see a little bit of a change in the type of stats it's showing. This weapon is only meant against armored vehicles, so here it's showing HE, or high explosives, which means it can fire at unarmored targets, or things like trucks or infantry, so soft targets only. When it has a penetration value, it only fires at armored targets only, or any vehicle really for that matter. And it also has a suppression value shown here and the range that it has against ground units. The accuracy once again is static, so these guys need to stand still before they can use the law. And then all the details about this weapon here are shown further down, such as the rate of fire, 21 rounds per minute, or rockets per minute. The aiming time, once again, the reload time, and the salvo length, which is just 1 rocket every time. And the supply cost as well when it runs out. Now, and at the far bottom here, the strength, meaning the amount of units, the amount of soldiers in the squad is shown. The advanced deployment, meaning that if they can spawn at your base camp or further away from your base, which I will get to in a minute as well. But in this case, these units are not actual airborne units, so they can't spawn further away than your regular units, so they need to spawn at base. The optics here, they just have normal optics, so if something is, within at a reasonable place, at a reasonable distance, these guys can spot it. They have pretty good stealth as well, and this is their speed when they're running around, which is pretty good for a fully packing soldier. So what do I then go for? We have some riflemen in helicopters. These are nice as a quick reaction force or to resupply or reinforce the front line. But we want some actual fighting units to take on the fight against infantry. So what I really like doing is to go for engineers, because these guys have either a satchel charge, which is a giant brick of TNT basically, or they have a flame rocket, if that makes sense. Basically these shoot like napalm rockets or incendiary rockets, and they do a ton of damage. Now what I like to do is go for engineers with satchels, but the only downside is you need to get quite close, 150 meters, but they are perfect at town fights. Or you can go for the engineers with rocket flashes, which fires at 500 meters range, which I will probably go for instead. Now if you go for veterancy, the bonus you get isn't actually that amazing. So with the trained veterancy, we're at 87% accuracy with this thing. If we go for a higher veterancy, it goes up to 88%. You might think, wait a minute, the chance to hit is a 5% increase. Why is it going from 87 to 88? That's only 1%. That percentage is based on what your base accuracy is. So it's 5% of this that goes on top. So it's not just 5% on top of this. But even more so, the base is already being buffed here. Or this is the normal training, but if you go for veteran, it's slightly buffed. So it's a percentage of this percentage. And if you go for the highest training, it goes up a little bit more. So that is really something that I always keep in mind when I go for this. So is it worth going for higher veterancy, but then losing 3 availability? For example, if I go for the lowest veterancy, I get 9 of these guys per card. If I go for 1 more veterancy, I only get 6, which is cool. You know, it can be a little bit tight. So I usually go for 9 of these guys. Now the cool thing is here you can choose the transports that you want these guys to be in. So you can either go for trucks, which are nice and fast, or you can go for the M113s, which are a little bit slower, but obviously armored. Now the other thing that you should know about trucks is unarmored vehicles, also helicopters like the Blackhawks, you can sell these vehicles after unloading the infantry and you get these 20 points back that you can put back into purchasing units, which is really, really cool. And it also cuts down on like empty transport spams in the game. Now let's go with engineers in the M35 trucks, because I usually don't really bother with M113s that much. Then we have engineers with dragon launchers. These guys don't have a light machine gun, they have an anti-tank. They have a long range anti-tank, I should say medium range anti-tank. Not the best accuracy, but in a lot of ways they do pretty good. And the cool thing about this weapon is that it also has an HE value, so it can also fire at infantry, which is really, really nice. So we have the anti-infantry incendiary rocket launchers. I want to kind of group these guys up with an infantry that also has anti-tank but isn't too expensive. So for example, we have the fire teams with the AT4, and the penetration value is shown here. And this is a value or the ability or value that represents the ability for this anti-tank rocket to penetrate armor. And this is not too bad. So 17, let's call it millimeters. It's not really millimeters, but 17 AP value will be quite effective against a tank with a front armor of 17. It's going to do quite a bit of damage. Even more so if you fire at the rear or the side of this tank where the armor is thinner. So this is usually a decent anti-tank weapon. 17 AP is definitely a mid to high tier anti-tank. So to combine it with my engineers, which are purely like against infantry, it's nice to put a fire team down there, and you can get them in Bradleys, which is just awesome. So I'm going to go for that. Once again, you can decide if you want like higher veterancy here. But in this case, it doesn't just adjust the veterancy of your soldiers, it also adjusts the veterancy of the vehicle they come in. So in this case, if I go from trained to veteran, the values of the Bradley's weapons or stats also change. So it goes from 65 up to 68. And that makes sense because it's a 5% chance to hit increase. 10% of 65 is 6.5, 5% of that is 3.25. So that's about average, you know, it's like 68.25 or something like that, percent accuracy. So that is usually something to keep in mind as well. So let's say we put 6 of those in. Now we have close range anti-tank, close range, well we have kind of, wait, we have 2 cards of these. We have close range anti-infantry, close range anti-tank. We lack long range. That is kind of our problem. Now for long range anti-tank units, you can either go for something that is specialized in anti-tank, such as the TOW2 launcher units, with a really good, really good anti-tank missile launcher, or anti-tank ATGM. What is it? Anti-tank guided missiles. 25 penetration is insane. It's going to basically 2-tap any tanks on the field. So it's really powerful and really good accuracy as well. And if you go for a slightly higher veterancy, obviously that increases quite nicely. So it stacks up pretty good. Or you can go for a fire team with the dragon launchers, which gives you more manpower. You get more of these guys. You can get them in Bradleys. The only downside is you have less of an, you know, a little bit of a downgrade in anti-tank, but it's still a good choice if you want also more manpower. So we're going to go for a couple of these guys. And what I might do is also give them slightly buffed, mainly for the Bradley, to be honest with you. I just want that Bradley accuracy to go up a little bit. So we have anti-infantry, we have anti-tank, both close range, we have medium to long range anti-tank. Now I want to get some support units. We could obviously use some more regular infantry, but I want to make this as balanced as possible. Machine guns are really, really good in this game. They deal a heck of a ton of suppression. They're really, really cheap as well, 40 points. And they're just a godsend. Trust me on this, if you're fighting infantry, you want a machine gun nearby. It does so much damage, and it suppresses the enemy so quickly that most of your other infantry units won't even get a chance to do any suppression on them. So I usually go for some 50 cals. They have a nice range too, 1400 meters. You can also go for the 7.62, which you get more of, but I usually go for 50s. They're just wonderful to use. Now, we have the support units. Now, another thing we can go for is mechanized rifles. These are very expensive, but this is a squad of 11 with 8 assault rifles, 3 M249 light machine guns, and they have the M47 Dragon team. The only downside is the transport that they come in. You can either go for M113s or the M35 truck. In this case, I'm going to go for the M113s just to have a vehicle on the ground that has 50 cals on it, which will come in handy at some point in the game. Now, as I mentioned, I didn't have a command unit in my logistics tab. What I can also do in this game, or in the infantry tab, is get a command unit in here, which is probably a good idea because we need a command unit in general, or I can get it in the tank tab, which I'm going to do, and I will explain when I get to tanks later. But we are also going to get a command in the infantry tab. Because why does a command unit or command leader actually matter in this game? Besides being able to capture zones, they also buff your units. So a leader unit grants 1 more veterancy level to all nearby units. So if they're already veteran, if they're nearby this guy, they basically go up to elite, which really buffs up these guys a ton. So I'm going to definitely use more of these leader units. Now we have already used 18 of our 50 activation points, so we gotta be a little bit more careful here. Now in the artillery tab, what I try to usually go for is mortars. Mortars are really wonderful at smoking the area. People use them for high explosives, but honestly mortars don't do enough damage in my opinion, or suppression, to really use them that effectively just to HE everything. You could do it obviously, but you recover from the suppression quite easily. If you're a competent player, mortars won't really hurt you that much. What I like to use them for is smoke. Breaking the line of sight between you and the enemy is vital at winning a battle, especially since I didn't go for the best anti-tank or the best range anti-tank unit. I only have these guys with 1500 meters range, or the mechanized, yeah, they also have the 1500 meters range. So if I break the line of sight, close in on the enemy a little bit, and then open up once the smoke dissipates, I'm in a much better position. So that's why I always go for a card of mortars. We can also go for some howitzers, the M109s, really good, really strong artillery units. And the interesting thing about artillery is that there are different types of ammunition. If you look at this guy, it only has high explosives, which is just basically the shell hits the ground or the target and it goes boom. There's also other types of artillery, like the M270 MLRS cluster. Interestingly, it has a penetration value. Basically, these rockets explode just about, just before they hit the ground, a little bit, a couple, I don't know how many meters above the ground, and then it basically just spews out shrapnel towards the ground, and these can penetrate armored vehicles. And tanks don't really have a good top armor, so these are really, really powerful. But the downside is they're quite expensive, 320 points, and they suck up a lot of supplies, like a ton. That is like crazy amounts of supplies. So if you want to use them, just make sure you have enough supply trucks. You also already obviously have high explosive rocket launchers, such as the M270 MLRS. And once again, all the statistics here are shown really nicely. So we have 12 rockets in general, or in total. The rate of fire is shown here, so 6 rockets per minute. This is the aiming time, so it takes about half a minute literally before this guy can fire up after you give the order. The reload time is about a minute and a half, and it fires all 12 rockets at once. Not at once, but in one mission. So, yeah, we have mortars, and another thing I would get probably personally is howitzers, because I just like to counter artillery. So if I see enemy artillery, I want to counter it and try to take it out myself. Now let's move to the tank section. Since this is an armored battle group, each card of tanks will only cost me 1 activation point, and this is amazing. Why? Because there's leader tanks that I can now put in, which can also act as command units, meaning capturing zones. Now, why would I spend 3 points to get a command card if I can just do the same with tanks for 1 point? Now, granted, these units are more expensive, 270 points, for the most experienced or the most expensive command tank you can get, but this does mean that it frees up 2 extra action points. You could already also just delete one of these supply trucks and get a command unit instead, but this is a cool trick that you can pull off. Now we have 3 command infantry units, we have 2 command tanks, so that is just fine. Now in the tank tab, we also have support vehicles, such as the M901 ITVs and M901A3 ITVs, and these guys basically have or ATGMs. And you can just compare the both as well. So for 20 points extra, you get a much better anti-tank weapon with 25 penetration. Again, that is an insane amount of penetration, giggity. And it's a 5% increase in accuracy. That might not sound like much, but in this game, every percentage of accuracy is actually, yeah, you kind of need it, brother. Now, another cool thing about these units is that they are amphibious, which is shown here. So they can actually go through water, so you can do some cool flanks with these guys and hit the enemy where it hurts. Now, since I have a lot of Bradleys with an ATGM launcher on it, I don't really feel the need to go for these guys. I can just get an infantry unit that comes in Bradleys and just use that thing, because it already has that TOW 2 on it. If I can just look at it, there we go. It already has a TOW 2. It already has a TOW 2. So there's no real use for me to go for these guys, apart from if I didn't go for any Bradleys with my infantry. Now, a cool unit that you can go for is the M728 CEV, which has a giant cannon on it. Really good for kind of supporting infantry. It does a huge amount of suppression, 480 versus 180 of a regular tank. So let's go with 1 card of those. And now I want 2 cards, maybe 3 or 4, maybe all of these with regular tanks. So just for the giggles, what I might do is go for another card of command tanks and then get the CEV. So we have multiple command tanks. Once again, not only to capture zones, but also to buff units nearby. And then we'll get some of our mid-range tanks, so the M1A ones. Let's see what the accuracy does when we go for a higher veterancy. It goes up to 68, which I am fine with. In this case, I am fine with losing 2 tanks per card for slightly increased accuracy, because we can actually put down a lot of tanks. So I'm going to go for 3 of these. That might sound like a lot. You can even go for elite, which will be pretty insane. And I'm going to go for 2 cards of the M1A1 HA Abrams. If we compare the stats, the HA Abrams on the left has much better armor, 20 instead of 17. And also much better cannon, which has 21 penetration instead of 19. And all the other stats you can also compare, but that is like the main gist of it. Another thing that changes with the armor is the side armor, increased by 1, the rear and top remain the same. So you really don't want to like turn your side to an enemy tank, because then there's a good chance that you might just get 1-tapped. And we're gonna get 2 of these guys. That is a really solid selection of tanks. You could obviously go for some of these M901s, 80-point ones if you want to. I've never really felt the need for them, since I can just use my Bradleys instead. So in the Recon tab, we have a lot of different types of units. Recon is the eyes and ears of your battle group. And a lot of you already complain why I don't use enough Recon. I personally just forget about them. Yeah, I just do Recon by moving stuff into the enemy line of, the enemies, and just hope that I spot them that way, which is not a good way to do it. Now with recon, my thought process behind this is I want something in helicopters, I want something on the ground, and then I want a helicopter recon and a vehicle recon. So there's quite a bit of recon. So the LRS here, and both the scouts and the LRS can come in helicopters, the Black Hawks, but they differ in weapons. So the scouts here don't have any anti-tank, while the LRS does. They have the Law, which can be useful if you flank behind the enemy and try to take out some units there. Another difference is that these guys are 4-man squads, whereas this guy or this group is a 6-man squad. The other thing is the price. This is 30 points, that's 70 points. So there's a lot of things that you really need to keep an eye on when you go for these kind of units. Now the LRS, I'm going to put these in Black Hawks, mainly to kind of try to flank around and spot. Actually, I might do it the other way. I might get these scouts. No. We're gonna get the Black Hawks with the LRS, and we're gonna get a bunch of these scouts. We don't need 9 of them, so that's when I also go for high veterancy. We're gonna get a couple of these in some of these UAZs, because I want these guys to just move to the front line, unload, and just be my eyes on the ground. You can also go for the M113 ACAV, which is pretty decent, has the 106mm cannon on top of it. And the cool thing about this vehicle is that it has some stealth. It's mediocre stealth, not bad, but the vehicle itself is also a recon unit. So if you unload, you actually have 2 recon units, which might actually be a good deal in this case. So let's go for the M113A ACAV. Now Bradley Recon is awesome. You can either go for the M981 Fist TV. Basically, it doesn't have a launcher on top, but has very good optics. Or you can go for the Bradley, which usually is my go-to. Now again, if you go for higher veterancy, the accuracy on the weapons and everything increases. 4 of these is usually enough. We also have a ton of other Bradleys, so I might just go ahead and get 4. You can go for lower veterancy if you feel like it, but they're quite expensive anyways. And if you really need to use 6 of your recon Bradleys and you lose all 6 of them, you're doing something wrong. Now in terms of helicopters, we also have a lot of choices here. We have the OH-58C Scout helicopter, very good optics, horrible stealth, obviously it's a helicopter. It does have miniguns. Or we can go for the Kiowa, which has rockets, or we can go for the Kiowa WR, which has Hellfires, but very expensive, very expensive, and this helicopter can be one-tapped with pretty much any AA. So that is also something to keep in mind. So we're just going to go for 1 card of these OH-58Cs. Now we have spent 37 of our 50 action points. We have 3 tabs left, so we have to be a little bit more economic. We can always go back and change some things if we want to though. Now Stinger teams, they're not bad, 55% accuracy on their Stingers. If we go for higher veterancy, it's not going to increase a lot because it's 5% of 55. Yeah, it's not going to do amazing. So in this case, I will go for the lowest veterancy that you can get. So we get 6 of those. You can even go for another card if you so wish to do so, which we might do. Then we have OH-58Cs, so AA helicopters. These OH-58s have Stingers on the side, which is great if you plan to do like an airborne assault with Black Hawk somewhere. You might want to have 1 or 2 of these to help out. So I'll go ahead and get probably 3 of them. Then we have Chaparrals. Notorious for not hitting anything, but it's the best we got, so we just kind of have to. Yeah, that is honestly the only reason. Again, I might go for 6 instead of 4 to kind of go for power by numbers instead of accuracy. And the accuracy only goes up from 55 to 57. So for me, it's not really worth losing 2 of these Chaparrals per card. So we have Manpads, we have the Chaparral, we have the OH-58, and I want the PVAD. So we basically get everything. We're basically going for everything. PVADs are great for one reason and one reason only. They will do damage whatever they fire at. If you look at the Chaparral, it'll deal 6 HE damage. Now, most airplanes only have 10 HP health. So if this hits twice, it'll destroy the plane, but usually it hits once only. The PVAD doesn't need to do that much damage. If it does 4 damage, or even 2 damage, and one of your Manpads also hits, that's a plane gone. But if you only go for Chaparrals, you're really just banking hard on RNG, And you might just not be able to take down many planes. Especially if it's an armored plane, which has like a little bit of armor, then you'll need 3 hits with a Chaparral. Whereas if you had 2 hits with a Chaparral and the PVAD taking a little bit of its health away, you will have an easier time at destroying it. Also, PVADs are better at destroying or stunning helicopters because they do a lot of suppression and stuff. Whereas Chaparrals, if they miss once or twice, they're probably going to get taken out by the helicopter. So that's why I usually go for kind of a mixture. Now in the helicopter tab, we have a lot of choices. We have Apaches. Now since our anti-air isn't the strongest ever, I don't usually go for a ton of helicopters. So what I usually go for is like a more balanced approach. We can get 2 Cobras for 1 action point, which I definitely appreciate. And I want to get 1 more. Now this Cobra only has rockets. I do want an Apache, mainly just for the sake of having an Apache. And I want the one that has Hellfires and rockets to be more of a multi-purpose, since we're already kind of low on action points here. Now in the air tab, with an armored division or battle group, the main thing I focus on is getting air superiority, or as much of it as I can. So I go for 2 cards of Eagles. You might think, okay, that is a little bit too much. Until the enemy has a lot of air power as well. You better be prepared than be underprepared. Better to have it and not need it. That is a good way to put it. Now another thing you could do honestly is actually take care or remove some of these Eagles, get some of these Phantoms as kind of a good bait to lure the enemy planes in, because they're much cheaper, and then you can take it out with the Eagles. So that is also a good way of doing it. And what I also want is A-10s. Now this one has Mavericks on it, this one has bombs on it, and we don't have the rocket one. The rocket one is only available in the 82nd Airborne, but having a bombing A-10 is also not a bad idea. The only downside of an A-10 is you usually lose it on the run that you do, because it's super slow. It is armored, but the enemy will have some AA, they will spawn a plane, and this thing will not get out of there. So in the case of an A-10, I usually go for the one that either has rockets or Mavericks. Now we are out of points, so what do? You can look back and decide, okay, I probably don't need this, I probably don't need that, I can probably reduce this, and then you can go forward. In my case, I really love my infantry, so I'm not going to touch this too much. What I can do is maybe remove some artillery, only go for the M109s. But in this case, I have tanks. I want to keep them smoked if I need to retreat. In the tank tab, I can definitely make something happen. We have a lot of tanks. Now, one thing I can do is reduce the veterancy of these tanks, but I kind of want to keep them up-vetted. So another thing I can do is remove one of our command tanks. So we have 2 of those, and that is using up a lot of points. Actually, how much is it using? It's using up 1 point right now. So that is not the most drastic thing. In the recon tab, we definitely have a ton of units. Oh, we have 2 cards of Bradleys. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll definitely do it. Let's remove 1 card of these, and then we have 3 more points. There we go. So we have 1 more point here, or 1 more card that we can fill up. We don't have any bombers. The only seaplane that we have is the Wild Weasel with horrible... That is not a good accuracy. That is not a good range. So I wouldn't even bother with this. You want something with at least like 65% accuracy. And definitely, slightly better range and stuff. And this plane, yeah. I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. One thing I would get is a bomber. Now, the F-111E HE drops 12 227 kilogram bombs, has 30% ECM, is really fast. It's a really good one. This thing will get in there, drop its bombs, and get the crap out. You can also go for a cluster version of it, which is obviously very good against armor. Since we are already armored, I just trust that my armored capabilities is going to be enough to take down vehicles. So in this case, I want something HE, something multi-purpose. And with that, we have the US 3rd Armored Battle Group ready. Isn't that awesome? Now, one thing that I really recommend is you guys to share your divisions or battle groups on my Discord. So one way you can do that is by clicking on your battle group and clicking export. Now you can go to my Discord and just basically go to the WARNO your decks or your battle groups text chat and just Control V to paste your code there. If you want it then imported, you just click on import. It'll automatically put your code here. If you've copied someone else's code, you give it a name, then you click import and it'll be here, which is really, really nice. Now, one thing that I also recommend for you, and if you're more experienced, is to hide all these like official battle groups that are pre-made. You can do that by just clicking on this thing and just tick pre-made battle groups. And let me see, only show custom battle groups. There we go. And now it'll only show the battle groups that you have made. And this will kind of make it easier for you to quickly select your battle groups when you need to and adjust them to your liking. So that is it for the second part of the WARNO Bootcamp series. We've talked about what the game is in the beginning, what all the different types of units are. We've moved into building our own battle group. Next up, we're going to talk about hotkeys, how to queue orders, all that kind of stuff, like how to micro your units, and we're going to go through all of those to hopefully make the game more enjoyable for you, because a large portion of this game can only be enjoyed if you're relatively competent at the game, which is a downside of RTS games for sure, but it's not something that we can't control. So we can definitely get a little bit better, enough to have much more fun in multiplayer matches. And just do remember, it's a video game, just try to have fun in the game. If you're not having fun, definitely don't touch it. If you are having fun, try to spread the news. Try to spread the news for this bootcamp series if you know some friends that are kind of struggling. And with that said, I hope to see you guys back in the next one. Take care.